Hi, this is Jared Lyon, and today we're going to talk about QR codes and best practices related to them. So, an overview of the presentation, we're going to just briefly talk about what QR codes are, and then we're going to talk about things to do if you want to create a QR code. What are the steps to take before you even make one? And then we're going to talk about a lot of different implementations and do's and don'ts, and it'll be fun. So, what are QR codes? If you don't know what one is, there was one just 2 slides back. And it stands for Quick Response Code. They were created by a Toyota subsidiary in 1994 for tracking vehicle parts. That company was named DensoWave, and it still exists. So what are they used for? Mostly encoding URLs so that you can take your smartphone, take a picture of this QR code, and get you to a website without having to type in the full URL. They've been in huge use in Japan for many, many years now, well, since 2004. And in the last 3 years, it's really started coming over to US and Europe, although not as prevalent as the usage in Japan. And it's also, just I should mention, one of many different matrix two-dimensional barcodes. They basically just, look like a random checkerboard. They're also the most popular because they're license-free. So, you want a QR code. What are the steps? You need to add value and be mobile friendly. These are really 2 different steps, but I just combined them because of this example. So this specific example is Macy's. You could take your QR code, you could go to a normal web page, but as you can see from the red X, you probably shouldn't be doing that. Or you could just go to a mobilized version of your home page, and that's good. If you've gotten that far, you're doing good. But really, I think the most bang for your buck with QR codes comes from when you make a mobile campaign, and that QR code leads to a specific campaign related to your brand. And Macy's did that very well with their Macy's Backstage Pass campaign. Basically, at every station, makeup stations and stuff, they had these QR codes. You could scan it, watch a video about that makeup, how to put it on, or not just makeup, but they had jewelry and stuff, and it basically eliminated the fact that you would have to talk to this salesperson, which a lot of people don't like. But they were fun. You could tweet them, you could send them on Facebook, and watch more videos. And it was one of the most successful campaigns, I think, for QR codes. So they've added value, they've made an interactive experience, the user's rewarded, and there's the interaction of you can shop, so Macy's is loving it because now it's just another way that you can shop. In terms of adding value, there's a couple different things you can do. I think videos are one of the biggest and best ways to add value with a QR code. But you could also have some sort of online quiz, or in the example of Macy's, they actually had the ability to shop as well. So it's not just videos. You could do a ton of different things with them. But shopping, quizzes, videos, those are definitely the most popular uses of QR codes, other than just sending them a user to a mobilized version of your website. So, shorten and verify URLs. I think a lot of people skip this step because they're like, oh, we just have to use a QR code. And so they just take their long URL and make a QR code and then paste it onto some print piece. When you shorten a URL, you get a smaller code, it looks better, takes up less space, they're easier for phones to even read because they're more succinct, sort of. And really, QR codes are already sort of unsightly enough, so why not minimize that? So in this example, we've got 3 different URLs, but actually, because of RIT's redirect system, we actually can use the shortest one on the right, and it will redirect to the longer URL. But then even just looking at the middle one, you can also shorten it. We've removed the www, and at RIT specifically, our divisions, such as student affairs, can be eliminated from the URL. So you start at this long URL, we can take out the www, take out student affairs, and at least just doing that, we've made a smaller code. Or RIT has a shortener system, which, as you can see from the rightmost example, that you get the smallest one yet. And on this second slide, it's sort of a continuation of this, I wanted to bring up Bitly. Google has its own shortener, tinyURL. I have a yellow question mark on that one because more and more people are concerned with security of things on their smartphones. And when you use a shortener, you don't know where you're going. Whereas for RIT specifically, with our shortener, it's the same number of characters in the URL, and it makes the same size QR code, so why not use the RIT one instead of the bit.ly? And for RIT, it actually there's only a certain section of RIT websites that can use the shortener. Non-official websites, like for students, those can't be shortened. So really, we're making sure that the rit.edu shortener goes to official sites, and therefore the security is better. And then actually, on the rightmost QR code, you can actually, just to squeeze a little more space out of them, if you use only capital letters in a QR code, it makes an even smaller one because it's using half the number of characters, sort of. Instead of uppercase and lowercase, it's just all uppercase. So with that rightmost QR code, we've actually eliminated that fourth correction dot, which is you've got the three main dots, three main squares on a QR code, and then there's a fourth one that's just sort of an error, not error correction, but perspective correction. So because it's so small, you don't even need that. Some people don't like all uppercase QR codes for whatever reason. Maybe they don't like how it looks printed or something like that. So really, either of those will work. And I should also mention that our specific RIT shortener doesn't have, it will never give you a random 5 characters with a capital I or a lowercase l and some other combinations, I think a 0 and a O, just because we were finding when people were printing them and then someone wasn't using the QR code but was typing the URL, there was confusion about what the character was. And finally, before I leave this slide, which it says on the bottom, for app compatibility, don't forget to put in the http:// on your QR codes. I see this a lot, and a lot of QR code reading apps actually will just show you the QR code as text, and they won't actually let you go to a website. Some of them, some of the better ones do now, but they never used to. And just for compatibility, you should probably put in the HTTP. Tracking. With any campaign that you're doing, you need to figure out if it's actually working or not. So even with QR codes, you should track them, see how many people are scanning them, what device, what time. It lets you know if it's effective. So types of QR codes. These are just the normal ones. There's nothing wrong with them. Obviously, they're a little dull. And the second half of this presentation is really what to do to a QR code to differentiate it and make your code more appealing, really. So those are normal ones. Those are all ones around RIT campus, but why not make them look better? So some simple do's and don'ts when making a QR code. There's a lot of things you can do to a QR code, believe it or not, but then there's also a bunch of things that people sometimes do which aren't really the best practice. You can change the colors. You always want to make sure you keep the foreground dark and the background light. Some programs actually let you invert them, but also a bunch of them don't, so best to stay away from that. You can actually put gradients in your QR codes, and I've done that a few times. You can rotate them, you can distort them. The standard for QR codes, it's made so that you can take a picture of them from an angle. And you know, distorting sometimes isn't advisable, but I know Time's done it before with a campaign that they did, and you can rotate them any way you want, believe it or not. And of course the don'ts. Don't invert, which I mentioned before. Don't use low contrasting colors. You really want to make sure that you keep the foreground and background different enough so that you can get a good scan on your QR code, especially if the code is potentially going to be somewhere like a bar or something like that, where it might look fine in normal lighting, but then when you're in a bar, it's even worse lighting, so the contrast, you might not even be able to see the QR code. Don't block the position markers. Those are key to a QR code working at all, and those are the 3 big squares. And finally, don't remove the quiet zone, which is that area around the QR code. You really need that for the scanner to be able to pick up those 3 main blocks. So those are just some things to do to make your QR codes a little more interesting. So here's some examples of bad QR codes that I've found around RIT. Obviously, I wasn't involved in these pieces, but everyone makes bad QR codes, and hopefully this presentation will help people stop doing that. The first one on the left, there wasn't enough contrast, especially in the lighting in the area that we were at. The next one is inverted, and the final one didn't have the HTTP, so some of the more popular ones might read the QR code, but QuickMark didn't at the time. I think they've allowed for not putting in HTTP now, the QuickMark app. But still, you want to include the HTTP for greatest app compatibility. Some more mistakes in the corporate world. The JetBlue sign on the left, the woman is blocking the marker, so it was actually not easy to read. But you could always still read the QR code in the bottom left of that piece. And on the right, you have Vibe magazine. Right on the cover, you got a QR code, and they didn't have http:// in the QR code. So some people could get to it, some people can't. Just, you got to put in that HTTP for everyone to be able to read them. And coincidentally enough, the JetBlue ad in that same location switched later to this, where it was the boy not blocking the QR code, the main marker anymore. And the irony of this whole thing is that it was in a subway and there was no cell phone access where that was located. So think about location too, lighting or cell access. So I've come up with a few different categories and types of QR codes, 4 of them to be specific. And these are all ways that you can take a QR code and make it more visually distinct. And they range from easiest to most difficult. This first category is framed codes. In this type of QR code, it's really easy to just say you have to switch your URL for some reason. You could just regenerate a QR code and paste it into that square area and you're good to go. It doesn't change the QR code itself, it's just the framing around it. Fox codes, they did that for quite a while, and I saw them in Entertainment Weekly. I really love the Iron Man one. It's an example of one of the really smallest QR codes, because it doesn't have that 4th correction dot. And from that one you could get to the trailer for the movie. So framed codes, definitely the easiest. And there again we have the Macy's QR code, and they framed all theirs in that red star, and those were the ones that were all around the store. So the next type, I call them simple designer codes. Designer codes is just this name that sort of people have come up with to talk about QR codes where you're actually changing the inside of the code in some way. And these simple ones, basically they're just replacing an area of the QR code with some sort of logo. And the way this is accomplished is QR codes have error correction within them. And if you increase the amount of error correction, it'll make the code a little bigger, and that means you can actually take out some of it because it'll error correct fine. Sephora magazine, which is the bottom left one, I think that came out soon after the Macy's one because they saw, oh, Macy's is doing this, and Sephora sells makeup. So they were showing people how to use makeup again. And I really like the Disney ones because those are examples of designer QR codes because they've replaced stuff within the code, but then they've also framed the code as well. So it's sort of like a hybrid of the two. So that's the medium level difficulty. And then we get to advanced designer codes. These are much more intricate. They're actually changing the normal square shape of the little modules of the QR code, the little square things, and they're rounding them. They're putting other things within them. I like the PlayStation one, which is the second from the left on the bottom, where they've taken the PlayStation triangle, square, X, and circle, and they've put that within the QR code. So these are framed, and they're putting the logo in, and they're changing the actual squares themselves. So that's basically the 3 levels. And the code on the bottom right is actually for the TV show True Blood. I thought that one was interesting. So the 4th type, physical codes. These codes don't scan well, unless there's something like the Lego picture in the middle bottom. That one actually scans perfectly because they're Legos and they're very exact. But inherently in the physical world, things aren't exact. You've got the pillow, which is sort of warped. That one won't scan. The top right one is actually waffles, and they've used like marshmallows and chocolate chips to make a QR code. But again, it's not scanning. It takes a long time to get these to scan, and actually on a computer I've adjusted the levels and then I can get it to scan properly. But very rarely do physical QR codes work well unless they're perfect tiles or something that you're putting down. The New York Times magazine on the left there, that one actually took me a while to scan even as well. That's all made out of balloons. So physical codes, they're cool, but you really have to take time to make sure that they work and there's enough contrast and stuff like that. So bad designer codes. These are ones where they're either too warped, too blurred, or the phone won't even pick them up. Here's some examples here. I really thought the wired one was cute, but again, it's not scanning well. And the ones that use tiny dots, which is, there's a couple different examples here, don't scan well. The one on the bottom left is all blurry, and it actually does scan on one program. I think it was the Quick Mark scanner app, but not really on any other ones. So it's fun making designer codes, but you really have to be careful that you don't go too far with them, and test on several different apps to make sure that it scans properly. So a question that I get a lot, QR codes, will they last? There was a study done within the year that said they were too difficult to use, and that 75% people are unlikely to scan them. But with all statistics, it depends on how you look at things. I think that 75% not likely, well, if I see a phone number on a piece, I'm not likely to call the phone number on the piece, and I'd say more than 75% of people are not likely to call a phone number when they see it on some sort of marketing piece or book or something. And in that same study, it showed that 80% of people have seen them before, so that at least there's that recognizability to them, and 19% of people were likely or very likely to scan the code when they see it. Comparing that to telephones, that 18.8% is way higher than telephone numbers. And that link there is a link to the people who did the study. So, recap. You want to reward the user. If I'm actually taking the time to scan a QR code, you really have to engage them in some way. And also make sure that you're mobile friendly. There's no point having a QR code that goes to your main website that just is, pages and pages of who you are with your mission statement. Shorten and verify URLs. You really have to make sure once you make a QR code that you try it in a few different apps, make sure it works. And the bonus of shortening the QR code is that later, if you want to do a designer one, you've at least made it as small as possible, and then when you do the error correction, it actually makes it bigger. Track your scans to know if what you're doing is even being used by anyone, and follow the simple do's and don'ts. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed my little video presentation here. These are some of my own examples of using QR codes. You can make a Facebook post about it, you can tweet about it, and also I've made 4 QR codes for these fun little domino videos that I've made that have been quite popular. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and thanks for watching.